And I always say to people, actually, communication coaching, if it's done well, should be about bringing you back to who you really are.
All right, welcome everybody back to the show. On today's episode, we have Richard Newman, who is the founder of Body Talk, a global leader in evidence-based training on the psychology of communication. Over the past 21 years, his team have trained over 100,000 business leaders around the world to improve their communication and impact. But Richard was not always a talented communicator. Richard is highly introverted, and he has high-functioning autism and was painfully shy as a child. At 18, Richard started his mission to discover the core communication principles. He went to live in the foothills of the Himalayas with Tibetan monks who spoke no English. They had to communicate non-verbally to understand each other. He then worked as a professional actor, studying how to walk, move, and speak to increase his impact on an audience. He became a keynote speaker, coach, author, and speechwriter, winning the coveted Cicero Grand Prize for Best Speechwriter of the Year. Richard's research on nonverbal communication was published in the Journal of Psychology. His study proved that you can increase your leadership ratings by 44% and win 59% more votes in an election by changing a few simple behaviors. Richard, I'm extremely glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I've listened to your book. We were just talking about your book as well. And I'm just really excited to dive into the realm of communication. You have a really fascinating backstory, like I just mentioned on the intro. And I would love to hear more about your journey and how that came about.
Yeah, so the journey with communication for me has been the last 4 decades. So I'm 44 at the moment, and back when I was 4 years old, I was going to the local school and enjoying life, and everything was great. And then a transition happened for me just before my 5th birthday, which is where I changed school and suddenly felt very out of place and unable to connect to the other kids at the school, and really didn't understand why. And since that point, around that sort of age between 4 and 5, I had continually felt that I didn't quite understand communication. I could see that friends around me and other people were really understanding and building friendships and relationships, and that I was slightly on the outside with a slightly different lens on what was happening. And so around the age of 16, a friend of mine bought me this book called Body Language by Alan Pease, where I started to read it and thought, this is amazing. This is teaching me things that I never knew, I never understood. And then I stepped back from it and thought, well, hang on a second. Is this stuff that everybody else knows? This is not something that I knew, but this is maybe something everybody else understands, and thought, I'm never going to be good at communication. And then for various reasons, things happened over the next couple of years where I thought, I have to get good at communicating. This is an area that's so important. So I decided that instead of going directly to university, I would go off to India, and ended up living in this Tibetan monastery where I was then teaching English as a foreign language, so teaching people who spoke no English and needing to use body language and tone of voice to connect with them, to teach them how to speak English, and just to get through my day, and figured out that through body language, actually, we could communicate so much between ourselves, way beyond what I'd read about in the books and that people may be aware of. Because when I talk about body language, often people think, oh, body language, yeah, I've heard about that. It's about when someone scratches their head, it means something, or if they scratch their nose, or if they fold their arms, that's a bad thing, which is very surface level on communication. But actually, if you dig really deep, and just imagine this for a moment, if you imagine spending 6 months of your life where you can't speak words to communicate with anyone, you can only use your body language and your tone of voice to connect. And suddenly you realize, well, you're going to have to figure out something that's a lot more depth than just folding your arms or putting your hands in your pockets. And so that's what we realized with working with the monks, that I could teach them a huge amount of English just through really focusing on the non-verbal side of communication. And the big key, which I still teach to clients today, 26 years later or something after I was there, is congruency. is that this has to be there in all communication, that your body language, your tone of voice, and your words have to go in the same direction. Because if they're split, then people have to make a decision of, do I believe your words or do I believe the body language? And overwhelmingly, people tend to go in the direction of, I think what I'm seeing is what I'll believe, as people have that phrase, seeing is believing. So they'll go in the direction of the body language, not the words. And so if you need what so many people talk about with authentic communication, that really means overcoming anything that is holding you back from full congruency from your body language, your tone of voice, and words going in one direction.
That's super. I've never thought of it that way, because oftentimes we know what we want to express, right?
Yeah.
Our body does it naturally, but the words sometimes might not be parallel to or fully capturing or encapsulating what we're trying to actually communicate. It also goes through all these filters in our head of how we want to say things.
Yeah.
So how is that process? What does that process look like to really find that alignment between our body language, our words, our tonality, and everything that we're trying to communicate?
This is something that people talk to us about all the time when I'm coaching clients, because the assumption sometimes is that maybe the best piece of advice on communication is to just be yourself. And so sometimes people are resistant to communication coaching because they think, well, that'll pull me away from being myself. And I always say to people, actually, communication coaching, if it's done well, should be about bringing you back to who you really are. So what happens through our lives is that we build up habits and what I call armor as well, that we use in the way that we behave when we're with other people, based on potentially going through rejection and people not responding well to us in business or in relationships or at school. And so we build up these coping mechanisms, which can then get in the way of great communication. And so if you go into a room, if you go into let's say a job interview, or you go on a date and someone says, just be yourself, actually what you end up doing is taking all of the bad habits, all of the armor, all of that baggage, if you like, that's coming with you through life that gets in the way of congruent communication. To be effective with communication, we have to start to recognize that there is some armor there that gets in the way. So the book that I brought out, You Were Born to Speak, is about getting back to, what was it like when you first stood up? What was it like when you first produced sound? So as an example of this, I'll get clients all the time, like 30 years old, 40, 50 years old, who say, the thing is, I'm just a really quiet person. And so I can't speak louder than this. So when I get on stage at the conference that you're coaching me for, this is the loudest I can get. And I'll say to them, okay, so when you were born, like the day you were born, and they're listening out to see, is this baby alive? Did you effectively say with your voice, I can't scream like any normal baby, I'm just a quiet person? Well, you didn't. Your whole body made sound that was tearing through the walls of the hospital that you were born in, making sure that everybody around you rushed towards you to help you. Whereas when we're older, the reason that we say I'm a quiet person is that there's physical limitations that we're using to stop the power of our voice. And if you strip those away, which is something that people do in everyday life, if they instinctively have to make sound. If you see, say, for example, your child running towards traffic, you don't say, well, I'm a quiet person, therefore I can't stop this. You just, I won't do it now because I'm going to blow up the mic, but this noise comes out of you to stop that situation from happening. And so, again, when we work with people, it's about coming back to that space of, what are the physical limitations that are holding you back right now? How do you get rid of those so you come back to you, to truly being you, which is what people want right now in communication. I think, we were talking about this just briefly earlier, that everybody's craving that sense of real connection with another human being. We've been stuck in our houses for the last couple of years with the pandemic, and we want to be with someone and feel the energy of the other person. And you can only really do that if all of the armor comes off and you're truly going to be with them for a moment while you connect. And so that means not just being yourself, which is the bad habits we've maybe picked up by just communicating through a webcam for a couple of years, but actually spending time to connect with whoever is around you.
That's so fascinating to think of this armor and this protection, these layers that we put on ourselves when we are communicating, because each layer is essentially either keeping us safe, maybe psychologically. I guess that's a good way to put it, is that if in the past, if we expressed ourselves in a certain way and that resulted in some reaction from another person that taught us that it's not okay to express ourselves fully. And then maybe that raised an octave in your voice to where now you're speaking from up here rather than taking deep, full belly breaths and being able to really project and use your full like broadcasting power, right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to think of it that way, and how we do show up with these coping mechanisms like you talked about. What are some of the most common ones that you see in your trainings? Is it more psychological, or is it more learning how to breathe properly and really tapping into that?
There's a whole range, really, and whenever someone comes into a room, I want to see, well, what are they presenting with right now? And the mission always being, how do I get that person back to their core personality, not everybody being the same, but coming back to how they were physically born to stand, speak, and move. And there's a few simple pieces. So one of the pieces we work on with so many clients is around gravity. And so a key coping mechanism that people have, which you can easily visualize if you're just listening to this, is that when somebody is standing up at the front of a room, let's say that they are doing a presentation or a speech at a wedding, then we tend to get to this place of feeling a sense of fight or flight, that sense of many eyes are looking in my direction, which is threatening to our sort of survival mind, thinking, if all these people decide to rush me at this point, I'm finished. And so this stress level increases. And what you see people doing is shifting their body weight from one hip across to the other hip, and then going back again, or sometimes sort of leaning back to try and mimic that sense of feeling super casual in a situation. And when we do this rocking backwards and forwards position, it feels comforting to us, but to other people looking at us, it looks like we are a pushover, or it looks like we are shifty, which is where these phrases come from. So gravity is then working against us, not working with us. And so I take people back to that notion of, let's say when you were a year old and you stood up for the first time. If you'd leaned on one hip, you would have fallen over. If you had your feet too close together, you'd fall over. Eventually, you work out the way for the human body to stand is to have your feet shoulder width apart, your sternum slightly lifted, so that gravity is going straight down your body into the ground. And so you have this appearance of gravitas. And so if you come back to having that, you don't need to have it all the time, but if you're about to walk into a room and you want to speak with authority to the team that you're working with, instead of standing off on one side, if you stand balanced with gravity working with you, people from a subconscious perspective think that you are more convincing, you're more confident, you're a better leader, they're more likely to vote for you in an election. And you mentioned the study earlier, but we were absolutely amazed when we created this study. It took us 18 months to do it. We involved people from all the way around the world, men and women, people aged from 18 to 65. And we found that was one of the pieces we looked at. If someone is off-center, then they are immediately seen as less confident, less able, but you put them into being centered. They can wear the same clothes, they can say the same words, and suddenly they are seen as a convincing, confident leader just because of their true interaction or authentic interaction with gravity. So that's one of the small pieces that we work on.
And it's so subconscious, I guess, or maybe we're so good at detecting these micro expressions in other people that we make those assumptions about people, or we make those determinations of whether or not we can trust somebody, or whether or not they're confident, or whether or not, like you said, shifty earlier, like something's they're uneasy. Like we just naturally pick up on those, and maybe we don't even put a name to them right away, but we can immediately sense those. And I was reading, I forget the book that I was reading about this, but it was describing how we have this line that basically goes through the front kind of plane of our body, where if we are tense, right, this is like our energetic like through line, right? And on the front of our body we have if we're tense, if we're self-concerned and we walk into a room, normally we contract, right? Our shoulders round forward. If we're tense, maybe we feel some energy in our stomach tightening up, maybe our throat is closing up, maybe our brow will tend to frown or something like that. Like you can detect and see those things really easily externally. But if it comes from being so self-concerned, or maybe not really stepping fully into your power. So once you actually like realign those and have that full channel of energy to flow through you, so you can actually show up as like in your full power. I think that's kind of like somewhat what you're talking about.
Exactly. We've done that with people where we get them to do, say, a talk, a speech, a presentation of some sort, and as they as they feel natural doing it. And natural is just whatever are the habits that you've had throughout your life up until this moment. So this now feels natural. It's not natural, it's just habits. And then we say to them, okay, get realigned with gravity and just lift slightly from your sternum. So you feel elevated, not so you appear sort of puffed out or arrogant, but just slightly lifted. And we say, now do the same talk in this room, and you can feel the energy of the room, and the reaction they get from people is totally different. And the person says, well, that feels weird. That doesn't feel natural. And we say, well, that's because you haven't been doing it for the last few years. So if you just coach yourself to that position, you don't have to do that all the time. But if you do it when you've got a moment where you want to be inspiring or have authority with people, or make sure you get commitment to an action, then suddenly you're much more likely to get that buy-in from them, because they will physically feel that influence from you that they weren't getting from you before.
I guess if you were to look at it through like the lens of like chakras, right? It's like your solar plexus in this area, which is where your power comes from and your sense of self.
Yeah.
So if you're really leading with that, then I feel like it's immediately felt that someone has a strong sense of self and they're coming from a place of power rather than like a place of constriction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's keep going on this conversation, because I'm really fascinated. What are some practical tips that somebody can start implementing right away? You talked about really kind of lifting the sternum and speaking from this position, and naturally the room will feel that. What are some other maybe practical tips that we could start implementing too? Because I'm a student. I'm always trying to learn how to be a more effective communicator as well.
Yeah. So thinking about some practical tips, some really straightforward ones. So first of all, I mentioned earlier, the key to good communication is congruency. You want everything going in the same direction. But sometimes when I say that to clients, they say, but what direction should I be going in? And so to make it really simple for people, we always say, focus first of all on how do you want other people to feel with whatever message that you have, with any interaction that you're having. Before you go in there, just decide and try and keep it really simple. One word. This is how I would like these people to feel by the time that we end this interaction. So let's say that you're going into a meeting with your team, and your end feeling that you want them to walk out of there with is a sense of being motivated. Well, great. In order to do that, if you keep that as a super clear intention, then your body language, your tone of voice, your words are all going to be aiming towards that, rather than if you go in there thinking, okay, I really hope that they don't give me a hard time, where suddenly you're sending that intention out there and you're going to physically react to, they're likely to give me a hard time, and they're going to look at you thinking, he doesn't seem to believe in this, or he seems super uncomfortable with it, and therefore I'm not sure that I should go along with whatever he's asking me to do. So you want to have that very clear intention. And to get clear on that intention too, we talked to people very recently about a real concept around lift. And what lift means is that if you aim with all interactions, that by the end of that interaction, the other person feels lifted by being with you, that they go from a negative or a neutral state to being in a more positive or potentially a more useful state, then suddenly there is that power of lift that you can use to navigate really challenging situations. And to talk about something topical at the moment, as we're recording this, is that we are 2 days after the Will Smith and Chris Rock event that's happened, and everybody's talking about it, and it's a really sort of complex issue, and that has become a very big talking point. And this is a situation where, for many years, if you look over the last few decades, you see Will Smith go and accept an award, and he uses it as an opportunity to lift the people in the audience, lift the people who are watching from home, aiming to lift all of his followers, the people who've worked with him on the production. So he's coming from that intention of, I'm going to lift everybody here. And if we look at what happened at the Academy Awards, then clearly that's not what happened. There was an emotional response that came out, and so he's physically attacked another person, then verbally attacked another person. And in his speech, he's then apologizing for what's happening, rather than having that moment where he could have lifted millions of people and thousands who are watching within the auditorium, which is where he normally would have gone. That emotional reaction has taken him off down a very different path. And I'm sure that if he'd taken a moment to reflect on, well, who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What is my intention for everybody watching? If I intend to lift the people here, then I won't physically lash out. Instead, I'll use the power of my words and the grace and the dignity of my reaction here to make sure that people feel lifted by what's happened. And I'm sure that everyone can relate to that on some small level where we felt triggered at some point by an event or a person around us, where we felt like possibly not hitting somebody else, but lashing out in some way or emotionally reacting to the situation. And if you can just take a moment to sit back and think, what would the lifted version of me do in this situation? How do I lift this other person? Then you can approach the situation like that. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Having perspective in a few days to think about it is a wonderful thing. But I imagine the lifted version of Will Smith would have said to Chris Rock, I know that you don't think it's funny to make fun of my wife's disease that causes her hair loss. And by doing that, he's not shaming him. He's not saying, how dare you? He's saying, I know there's a better version of you in there. And by doing that, we would have thought, wow, what a lifted response he's had. And he would have lifted Chris Rock's response back and the whole room and everybody watching around the world. And so if you can approach interactions with that sense of, how do I lift in this moment, even in the hardest moments, in conflict resolution, in relationship challenges, you stick with that sense of, I'm going to lift myself, therefore I can lift others, and therefore we have a lifted interaction. That for me is the core of good communication. And the reason it's so important to me is that coming from having only just recently been diagnosed with high functioning autism, there's been a challenge that I've had with communication, trying to understand what's going on with neurotypical humans, which is most people, is trying to figure out these little things that people do that I've never been able to be that good at, which is, if you take the example of banter, where for me, this has been a mystery for decades, and I still shy away from it because I don't want to offend people. But when there's banter going on, essentially what I see is two people say something mean and negative towards each other, and then they laugh, and it creates this more positive, connected relationship. And as you can imagine, as an outsider to that, if I try doing that, saying something negative or mean to someone and then laughing, that doesn't go very well for me. And so what I've noticed is trying to unpick that, as I do with all types of communication, is that you suddenly realize the reason that those situations work is because the person is trying to lift the other person. Even though the negative words that they say or whatever situation that they're picking on may seem out of context, unfair, what they're aiming to do is actually to lift the relationship, to lift the atmosphere in the room, and that's why it works. And so to come back to the sense of, practical tips, I encourage everybody to go into a room committed to congruency, think about how you want other people to feel, bring the lifted version of you, and aim to lift the other person or people in that room. And suddenly that's where you get really great communication coming from.
I love that, because that works in all relationships too. Like every interaction would benefit from you approaching it through that lens.
Yeah.
Of like, how do I want this other person to feel at the end of this conversation, or what I'm trying to communicate, right? And because you can communicate things poorly, or you can communicate them kindly, right? So it's about finding that balance of speaking your truth, as well as thinking in advance of what the feeling that you're going to walk away from this conversation. Because most people, I mean, maybe a few months from now, weeks from now, might not remember all of the content that you discussed in that conversation, but they will remember the feeling that they walked away from that conversation. So I could definitely see that approach being really useful in any, especially like conflict resolution type of discussion, correct? Like how could you approach that? I'm curious now, how could you approach that in relationships? Like, can you give an example of like a conflict that you could use that lift technique to go into?
Yeah, so if you're having a conflict in a relationship, what can tend to happen is in another area that we talk about with clients is storytelling. What you might tend to do if you're having a difficult situation is to create a story about that person, which is, this person is bad, this person wants to harm me, there's nothing good about them, and therefore I need to find a way to manipulate or pull this person apart so I don't have to deal with them. I've dealt with that in different ways with people who are going through very tough negotiations in business, where you've got difficult relationships, there's politics within a company they're trying to deal with. And so we can tend to create this story in our minds of, this is a bad person. I don't deserve this. I'm a good person. They're a bad person. And we see this in stories in movies and TV shows and books all the time. A good person versus a bad person who tries to get rid of or expel this person. And so I always ask people, first of all, to sit back from that and say, let's find the best version of you, and let's imagine the best version of this other person. And if you see the best version of them, you're going to give them an incredible gift. So the example I give is, if you think about maybe a friend or a grandparent or somebody in your life who has seen the best version of you, everybody will be able to find somebody like that. And maybe they saw magic in you or a talent in you that you didn't know that you had. And because of that, they become a really significant person in your life. They see a lifted version of you, and then you're almost driven towards wanting to live up to that. So if I give an example from my life, there was a hairdresser when I think I was 22 years old. And he saw within me, I talked to him about living with monks and teaching them English, studying acting. And he said, I see you being a great teacher. I could imagine you coming into my salon and teaching everybody here how to be a great communicator. And I said to him, I can't do that. That's not something I've ever done. He's like, no, you're going to be great at it. I'm going to give you a free haircut. You're going to come back. You're going to do this. And I went back and I did it. And they loved it. And I walked away thinking, wow, I enjoyed that. And I found that quite natural. And they really enjoyed it. Then they invited me to come back. And they ended up being a client of mine, a paying client in the end, for 16 years. And from there, there was a person who was sitting in the hairdressing chair like a few weeks later who gave me a call, and he said, I'm the head of an engineering company. I want you to come and train all of my engineers because my hairdresser has just told me that you're the #1 communication expert in the country. Well, I thought, well, that's probably too soon to be saying that, but okay, fine. And so he saw this version of me I didn't know existed. And so I felt compelled to find that potential within myself. So let's take that back to a really tough conflict conversation. If you're having conflict with somebody and you go into that meeting seeing the worst in them, there's no question that interaction is going to go badly, because that's a horrible interaction for anyone to have. If you imagine someone coming into a meeting with you and they only see the worst in you, it's very hard to make that conversation go well. Whereas if you go into a meeting and you aim to see the very best version of that person, imagine when they were 5 years old, in a school playground, trying to just find some person who wants to be friends with them and see that version of that person. Then imagine, any conflict, any challenges that may have come up through their life that may have led to the challenging behavior that maybe you're dealing with right now. Still just see the best version of them. And you may not find in that meeting, in that one conversation, that the greatest version of them comes out, but they will have heard your words and they will have seen that you saw them. And therefore they'll leave thinking, I should be a better version of me with that person. I need some time to reflect. And then you may find the next conversation and the one after that, suddenly they start to blossom and become the person that you knew that they could be. And therefore the interaction gets better. The one caveat I give with this is that it can't be patronizing. It can't be that sense of, you're not being a good version of yourself now, and I know that there's a better version of you in there, so come back when you're ready. It can't be that. It has to really be, I'm a human caring about another human being and wanting to see the best version of them come out. So even in tough situations, and I've applied this to like a legal battle that we've had to be in recently as a company. I've helped clients do this with global negotiations. They're doing huge billion-dollar brands and allowing them to approach this. And in each and every situation, it's allowed for a much more positive interaction for people to have, because it comes from that pure spirit of one human being seeing the best in someone else.
How do you approach that if they, like in that discussion, they're just still showing up in this way that's challenging? Do you just how do you navigate that?
So maybe if we think about this, the easiest way to compare it is when you're a child and you get stuck or stubborn in a certain negative behavior. Think about if it was a parent or guardian or family member or somebody who still always kept themselves behaving back to you with dignity, where they always still saw the best in you, eventually you get to a point where you go, okay, I give in. I'm gonna bring a better version of me to this next conversation. And that's what we remember. And maybe, a nice way to think about this is, don't ever let somebody else's negative version of them or negative behavior turn you into a negative version of you. And that's where, we need to be mindful of not getting triggered, is to make sure that the best version of us shows up in every conversation, regardless of what the other person is bringing towards us. And they, whether they're telling you or not, whether they're showing you or not, they will recognize, okay, this person is acting with dignity. As we all did at some point when, as a child, or maybe as a student at school, we'd act out for a teacher. And the teachers who lashed out back at us or reacted harmfully back at us, we were like, okay, well, I've beaten you.
Yeah.
I pushed you and you broke.
Got a reaction from him.
Yeah. Whereas there were teachers, I still remember when I was sort of 16, 17, 18, the maths teacher we had, he had the respect from everyone in the school in a way that nobody else did, because he always saw us as adults, not as kids. And when there was misbehaving going on in the class, he would simply look at people as if to say, I know you can do better than that. And we'd think, oh, you're right, I can. And then we'd bring the better version of us out. So I'd always say, don't let other people's negative behavior take you away from the best version of you.
So it's almost like kind of having this unconditional love for the other person, and like you said, seeing them through that loving lens of like the best possible version of them, which is just they're going to be the most loving versions of themselves too. And then never wavering from that, because it's true, it's hard to not be triggered whenever somebody might, because our natural, at least my reaction when somebody is like lashing out at me is like this visceral reaction to kind of like lash back, right? But having that self-awareness or that pause to be able to just continue to show up, and knowing that you're not going to be able to control them, but you can still, control how you respond to what they're saying or how they're behaving. Yeah,
well, I've got to say, actually, I feel really inspired by the way you handle yourself on social media, because I've seen, some people will put really negative comments on posts that you do, and I've only ever seen you respond back to that in a way that is lifted, what I would think of as lifted, which is a sense of wanting to be compassionate to that person, and also wanting to learn from anything that's coming out of it, but also, letting that person have advice from you and be inspired by you without getting stuck into sort of attacking them back, coming from that positive place, which is something we really need on social media, because it's so easy for that just to turn into like a burning pile of flames of people sort of trying to tear each other down with words, because it's so easy to do in that disconnected world on social media. So I think it's more important there than ever. And I'd also say that, taking that back to, day-to-day interactions that we have, it's really important, and this is something that I learned back when I was living with the monks, is that words are really good for delivering completely factual information, such as if I wanted to share my home address with you, if I tried to do it through body language, we're not going to get very far. Like, I'd be here the whole time trying to figure out, like, how do I show you the address and the angle and where the street is? So words are really good for that. But if you're having an interaction that has any kind of emotion involved, it's worthwhile thinking, should I send this by text? Should I be sending this email? Is it better if I just pick up the phone? Or a lot of people are in the habit these days of sending just a voice message, because the tonality behind that allows you to understand more of the context of how that person feels right now. So it's always worthwhile adding the tone, adding the body language, if you can, to give more meaning to the interaction and save it turning into a complete sense of misunderstanding. Yeah,
because that's so true, because like those text conversations or comments or emails, there's so much room for interpretation, and it's really depending on the reader and what state they're in, and what lens they're reading that through. Because you can misinterpret somebody's message through text and have a completely different version of what the sender had originally meant to send. So I definitely believe you there, and like I'm on board with you as far as like I prefer voice notes and phone calls over email and text conversations, especially if it's any kind of, like you said, like an emotional or like a challenging conversation. I think that those should be had either person to person or with more than just text being the only modality of communication. And then secondly, to your point about the social media and responding to negativity there, I had to learn quick I had to learn quick, because you're just bombarded with comments. And I mean, granted, majority of it is always positive. 99% of it is positive, but our brain tends to seek out the non-positive comments, right? It's like those, you can have 100, 200 comments, everybody's showing you love, and then there's the one person that's like, hey, screw you. And that's the one that you want to respond to the most, because at least viscerally, I'm like, what did I do to offend this person? Like, I'm just trying to share this message, and this person's attacking me personally. And I had to learn really quick. I could either take that and react to it, or just respond with compassion and love. It's okay to have a different view on life. You can have your opinion, I can have mine. There's no reason to make it personal, and if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But I can't attach myself to that type of energy, unless I would just be pushed around all day, from people online that would be controlling my emotional state. So that same lesson, because I had to learn it in such magnitude of having thousands of interactions with people, that more interactions than most humans get to have or exposure to on a daily basis. It's almost like it can be a form of like data acquisition, right? It's like testing, like A/B testing. Like, you put something out and you get data back with how people respond to it. So learning how to navigate those in such high volume has definitely allowed me to take that into my personal life and not respond or take things personally whenever somebody has an opinion, because at the end of the day, it's an opinion, and maybe you are a trigger for that person, and you're just revealing a part of themselves that is reflective of them, maybe a part that they're refusing to accept or can't accept or don't like or judging themselves for. And you're just a mirror for that. But it's, it's not necessarily your responsibility to act in accordance with that, or to react backwards in that way.
Well, I mean, there's so much said in this area as well, where many quotes come to mind. Warren Buffett says that it takes a lifetime to build your reputation and just 5 minutes to lose it. And if you remember that, then you'll act differently. And when we do follow somebody, or we're inspired by someone, if it's a leader of a company or of a following online, when we see them being attacked or in a difficult situation, we are often really tuned in to see, well, I wonder how this person reacts in this situation. Because if we are inspired or led by somebody, we often want to see, how does this person really act under pressure? Because then you learn so much more about them than you do in the safety of the day-to-day comfort zone the person may be in. And I also take great comfort in what Brené Brown has been saying on this subject, where she said that when her TED Talks are up online and her books are out there doing well, she then made the mistake of going online and looking at people who are making comments, and there was lots of negative comments about her appearance, about her ability as a human. And she came across this quote, which was essentially saying that you should only really take feedback from people who are in the arena with you, not the people who are observing on the edges, but the people who get their hands and face dirty and are there taking part. And to allow for the fact also that, if you get getting no negative feedback, you're probably not really stretching yourself or connecting with that many people. I, in a position where I am right now, where I've been teaching clients for 2 decades, and we've worked with over 100,000 people, which I'm always so amazed by and humbled by as well. For us to get this far and have nobody be negative towards us would be insane. It would just, you can't do that. Even if you are selling ice cream, eventually somebody is going to come up to you. If you sell 1 million ice cream, somebody's going to come to you and throw one in your face saying, how dare you? So it's worthwhile just keeping that in perspective. Like you say, with that sort of A/B testing of thinking, well, when I share information and I've got this number of followers, if I don't get any negativity at all, I'm probably not emotionally connecting with people that much. Maybe I'm very safe in this information. So it's worthwhile carrying that perspective. I also say this to people when I'm coaching them to speak to an audience, where I say, look, 90% of the people in the room, or even actually I've seen this statistic that 96% of the room is who you're really working with, because 2% of the room will love you no matter what you do. And 2% of the room will not like you no matter what you do. And it's the other 96% that you're really working with. And I remember this, to come back to your point about just tuning into the negativity, where I was doing a talk in Manchester, and there was 500 people in the room, and 499 of them were loving what I was doing. They're doing all the activities. They're really getting into it. And I could see somebody on the back row, and it's like this tiered seating auditorium, somebody in the middle of the back row who was just sitting there, arms folded, sort of angry looking on his face, and just sort of looking at the people around him, shaking his head down, sighing. And in the moment, I was taking it personally, thinking, what have I done? This is a session that you didn't have to show up to. This was actually an optional session as part of the conference, but you're choosing to be here. And thankfully, live in that moment as I was running this, I wasn't allowing it to get me distracted, because I thought, I don't know what's happening in this person's life outside of this room. It's very possible that he just got fired, or that he just had a breakdown of a long-standing marriage, perhaps. Anything could be going on with that person's life, and therefore, the 499 is the people I'm going to take that feedback from, not the one person. And not to say that you dismiss people who give you negative feedback. You can always learn something from it, but don't allow it to distract you from your purpose.
Yeah, don't take things personal from people you're not personal with. It's a good quote. It's like, if you took everything personal from strangers on the internet, then you're just giving your power out to anybody that can leave a comment. And if you let that comment determine, your emotional state or your worth or your value, then you are in for a tough a tough future. Because you have to learn how to really have that self-identity and know that people's opinions are just that. They're entitled to it. They have lived their life through their experience, and they think and act and behave in the way that's in accordance with their experience, which is different than yours. And you can learn how to coexist with those people without taking it personally, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if somebody that spoke Chinese came up to me and insulted me in Chinese, I would have no idea what they're saying. They're just making noises. And the same can be said for anybody that's speaking English to you. Ultimately, they're just making noises, and you're giving meaning to the noise that they're making, and you're letting that noise affect your internal emotional state. So if you can approach any conversation with that, or any kind of conflict, or like maybe negative feedback in that way, not necessarily dismiss it, but just don't make it about who you are as an individual. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's imperfect. Everybody can learn something at some point in your life. So it's just an important lesson to kind of remember.
And there's another way to approach this too, because people often come to us because they feel a lack of confidence about an upcoming pitch or upcoming meeting, conversation, and they're wondering, how do I approach that? And we talked to them about the difference between internal and external validation. And there's a really interesting study on this called the triasocial stress test, where they found that for some people, if they're going to say a job interview for something that they really want to get, and then they get the panel in the room to shake their head, fold their arms, say the words, "You're not good enough." And then they get them to stand up and do a presentation unexpectedly and ask them maths questions. They're trying to put them under a lot of stress. And people will leave the room feeling like their adrenaline's through the roof, their heart rate's through the roof. They are feeling extremely stressed out, and you can measure it. Whereas if you go into that situation with internal validation before you start, really focusing on your personal values and the kind of person that you want to be in any situation, then your heart rate doesn't increase. There's no increase in the adrenaline either. The cortisol doesn't go up, and you're much more likely to be given the job as a result, because you're not seeking the external validation. You're already validated before you go in. So you're coming from that core sense of drive from within, rather than to react to what's going on outside of you. And it doesn't mean that you don't react to other people, but you're coming from a core sense of self, rather than trying to figure out who you should be based on how other people perceive you. Because
you're gonna have to try to fit yourself into like, what's the expression, like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole, one of those. If you're constantly trying to morph into the version that you hope the other person wants you to be, because it's really there's another quote that says, "I'm not what I think I am, I'm not what you think I am what I think you think I am." Does that make sense? We really place a lot of value on what we think the world thinks of us, instead of placing our value of what we think of ourselves.
There's a nice quote that goes with that. I forget who made it well known, but it was along the lines of, if you realize how little other people think of you, then you won't worry about it so much, because we are continuously obsessed by, I wonder what this person thinks of me. But actually, most of their mindset isn't on you. It's actually on them and their lives. And what does this mean? And how does this fit into their mindset, their story? It's worthwhile relieving yourself of that pressure.
Yeah, the same. I receive this question often when I coach my fitness clients. Is some people have difficulty going to the gym because they feel self-conscious, they feel uncomfortable that people who are in better shape than them will be judging them for doing an exercise improperly, or maybe judging them for being overweight or not in shape. And I remind them every time, I say, when you go to the gym, people go to the gym to look at themselves. If you stand in their way, they will tell you to move out of their mirror space so that they can look at themselves. So chances are, if somebody's looking in your direction, they're probably trying to catch their own reflection.
Yes.
They're not necessarily looking at you and judging your form or how much effort you're putting in.
Yeah. I mean, nobody goes to the gym thinking, I really hope I see somebody else that I think I look better than.
Yeah.
They're going there to do their own thing. Yeah, exactly right.
So let's talk about storytelling too, because I think that storytelling is such a fascinating part of our lives, that if you can really master how to tell a story, you can immediately become captivating to anyone. You can go to a party. I mean, people will be more interested in what you have to say. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 stories that I feel like people say frequently, and it's who are you, or what do you do, and where are you from? Yeah. I mean, those are 2 stories that you probably repeat over and over and over again, and you probably have a canned response for those 2 questions. So I always think of, how can you make those 2 stories interesting, so immediately whenever you first get to know somebody, they're already interested in who you are based off how you tell that story.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the other one that comes up if you're in a relationship is, how did you guys meet?
That's the other third one.
Third one. And that's one that, as a couple, you tend to get better. Well, you either get better or worse at it over the years, depending on how much you enjoy telling that story. But Gemma and I, we've told that story so many times. We sort of feed into each other, like, okay, you take this part, and I'll do this piece.
That's how me and Bianca are too. You do get into that pattern, that groove, where you're like, okay, I'll tell this part of the story, you tell that part. We'll kind of like pass it off to one another.
So I mean, you're right to say that storytelling is just a brilliant tool to be able to use in all sorts of situations. And that story about, well, who are you and what brought you to where you are today? That's a story I've been asked so many times by, running a business now for 22 years and having clients who work with us globally. So many times they say, so tell us about you and your company. And that becomes a story that I get to tell often. And you're right that it becomes a patter that I've found that if I include in that story about how I was living with monks when I was 18 years old who didn't speak any English, that story comes back. It could be 2 years later. We're working with the client and they say, oh, you've got to meet Richard. He's the guy who lived with monks. And there's so much more about what we do and all the skills that we teach, but they loved learning that origin story. So it is a worthwhile story to get right. But as I say to people with storytelling, this is something that everybody can use every day for every email, conversation, meeting, pitch, or presentation, if you're doing those things in business. And it doesn't necessarily have to be around an anecdote or an event that happened. You can actually use the power of storytelling to guide the entire meeting. Even if it's a 2-day meeting or a 2-minute conversation, you can use it to guide the entire experience. And what this is about, if you get it really working for you, is to understand there's 3 major parts of the brain involved in good storytelling, where the concept, the framework comes from, which is the survival mind, the emotional mind, and the logical mind. And great stories engage those 3 parts of the mind in that order. So we feel captivated to watch them. So if you imagine watching a movie or reading a book, we initially learn about the ordinary world, the context that person is in, and very quickly we learn that their current situation is under threat. in some way. Like if they don't pay their bills, they're going to be thrown out. If they don't turn into a better person, they'll never see their kids again. Or there could be all sorts of things that challenge them initially, that fires up the survival and the emotional mind saying, wait a second, this person, their life is fine and it's about to be severely disrupted. And ultimately, if they don't do much about it, things can get way worse. And so we're captivated and we think, I have to now watch more of this to find out how they get out of it, because from a survival perspective, what if that happens to me? I need to know what the lesson is. And a really funny version of this that I came across, Robert McKee, who is the master, the godfather of storytelling in Hollywood. I think his students have won more than 60 Academy Awards, 200 Golden Globes. And I remember him talking once about watching Finding Nemo, where he sees this goldfish, or this fish, that is in a goldfish bowl in the dentist's office. And he's just captivated by this idea of, wait, so he's been separated from his father in the ocean. He's now in a dentist's office. How is he ever going to get back to the ocean and meet his father again? So there's this sense of someone's trapped, they're isolated from their family, I have to now watch. And it's a ridiculous situation because it's just this animated film about a fish. But suddenly we feel compelled to then watch the story. And so you can do this in everyday conversation. If somebody bumps into you at work and says, hey, what are your thoughts on this project? You can just give them your thoughts, which activate the logical mind, or you can talk to them in a way that engages the survival mind, emotional mind, and the logical mind. And if you think about, so many of the interactions people have with each other in their daily working lives, most of it is logical, which is where people just get this numb feeling, this fatigue from going to these meetings. They come out and they think, I don't even know what happened in that meeting.
I've been in so many of those.
Right, yeah.
Especially when I was an engineer, I'd walk out and be like, what just happened?
Yeah, exactly, because people are giving you sort of data, numbers, statistics, spreadsheets, graphs, all this sort of thing. Whereas we work with a lot of engineers, and engineers we find are brilliant to work with because they go, give me a system. I like a system because I know systems work. And so we share with them this storytelling system of aiming to engage people from survival and emotion, then into logic, then into action, which is the process of an effective story. And so you can take any information and carve it out in that way. And so if someone's listening to this thinking, okay, how am I going to do that tomorrow? Like I've got this update that I need to give people. How do I do it? Well, the way you carve it up is to first of all talk about the past and talk about context and challenges and say, look, hey, everybody, thanks for coming to this conversation. I know that from talking to you recently, we've had this challenge that's been going on and that I know you're concerned about. And straight away, people are thinking, I'm so glad I showed up to this meeting because you're actually going to talk about something I care about. You can do that in a relationship too, where you could say, look, just wanted to talk to you for a moment because I understand that, we've been having this challenge for a while and I really care about you and I care about why that's concerning you. Straight away the person is into this conversation. Nothing else matters. They're not focusing on social media because they know it's a meaningful moment. And then what most people do to ruin their story is they go from there straight to the solution. They say, so I was thinking what we could do is this, and they get rejected and they wonder, well, why? Because that's not storytelling, that's just telling. You're going from here's a challenge, here's a solution, which is like, imagine going to the recent Batman film that's just come out where there's a load of bad guys at the beginning and Batman shows up and says, should we arrest them? Like maybe that's the end of the movie. You think, well, okay, hang on a second, I'm not going to pay $20 to go and see this. So what you need to do in a conversation in a relationship, also in a meeting at work, is you talk initially about, here's the challenge. This is why it's meaningful for you, not just me or the company or our situation or my position in our relationship. This is why I believe it's meaningful for you. And you can ask people questions to get them on board with the story. And then you talk about a better future, which is what stories do all the time. Within the space of the first 15 pages of a movie screenplay, that's what people are looking for, producers are looking for, to think, do I actually want to make this movie or not? You hear about the current world, the current challenges, and then you see this vision of a possible better future. And you can have that in a relationship conversation where you can say, look, we're here right now. I would love, and I think that you would love as well, for us to get to this place, this space, and let's talk about that for a moment. What is that vision that we would have of where we could be? You can do this in an update meeting as well, saying, look, we've got this challenge right now. Here's the context. what I'd love to do is by the end of this meeting, give you clarity, give you reassurance, give you a sense of knowing exactly where to find the right information this week. And people think, wow, I'm so glad I showed up to your meeting. That's what it's about. The brain says, from a survival and an emotional perspective, I'm in. And it then, if you've done it well, the amygdala releases or sends a signal to release dopamine flooding through the brain that then helps you remember what comes next. And what comes next should be, this is the path. This is the journey that you walk on. So in storytelling terms, this would be like the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell so brilliantly put together, although his version has got 17 steps, which is kind of hard if you're doing an update email to people. So you can't go through the
steps,
the inner cave and the denial of the quest and meeting the mentor. You can't do all that stuff. But instead, what it basically says is there's a challenge, there's a better potential place in the future, there is a journey to go on to get there, and there are actions to be taken. And that's what we talk to people about. And we've worked with people who've had, in British pounds, the biggest project we've worked on was where they won a contract worth £600 million. So I don't know what that is in dollars, like 800 or 900 million dollars. But we literally worked on the story. We said, you've got to change the way you're telling this story and the way that you approach this story. And they went from third place for getting the job up to first place. So you can use it at the highest levels of business, but you can also use it for a really effective one-to-one conversation in your personal life or your professional life by guiding things through that journey of storytelling. Because it's simply, storytelling to me is speaking in a way that the human mind will thoroughly engage with. That's what it's really coming down to. That's what story is. It's not about talking about your weekend or stuff that happened in the past. It's engaging the mind in the way that it wants to listen to information.
And this is so important for any business owner as well, because your business has its own story. Right? Your services have their own story. Your products have their own story behind it. I did an event this past weekend. It was called Vegan Street Fair. So it was like one of the biggest vegan events in LA. So they shut down this whole street and they have a couple hundred vendors and different vegan companies and food trucks and restaurants and whatnot. And this was our first, since I've launched my supplement company, Veg, this was the first time that we had ever done a pop-up or an in-person event, because we had launched just before COVID. So COVID happened. We weren't able to do any live or in-person events. And I'd been wanting to do one for a while because I didn't want people to think that we were just an e-commerce brand and we didn't have a soul. And as effective as you can be online and telling and sharing those stories, there's something to be said about meeting people in person. And I found myself unintentionally repeating this story of why I created or why I founded Veg. And it was because when I first went vegan, I was looking for supplements, and it was a challenge in itself. I would have to get this product from this company and this multivitamin from this company because they weren't a fully vegan company, and I had to get this pre-workout or protein powder from that company. And I really just wanted to go to one place and support one company that was fully aligned with my core values and the quality of products that I wanted to consume. And I found myself telling that story. And when I did, I could see like kind of like the framework of what you just laid out, as far as like, here's like how things were going for me, and then there was the problem, and then the journey to discover and research and formulate and then eventually produce these products. And then people were like just sold by the end of it. And I wasn't necessarily trying to sell them. I was just sharing the story of how the company came about because they would ask me. So,
and I imagine that story probably resonates with them very much too. If people are planning to have a vegan or plant-based diet and they're looking around for supplements, they may have that same challenge, so that they recognize in you, I've been trying to look for those supplements. I wish there was a better way. You've already gone on the journey, and then they want to be part of that tribe or that journey with you. So the story of your brand is so important, and it's more important, I think, to people now than ever, because there's a sense of distrust of companies and just seeing the logo, like you said, like maybe an e-commerce site where you don't really know who the people are, there's no connection. So we love knowing who's the founder, why did they do it, what was that all about to begin with, what is their intention behind that? Because if I'm then spending my money on this, I get to be part of saying that's who I want to be as a human being. And people think about that with the the brands that they buy into, maybe the cars that they own, where they decide to live as well, is that sense of what does it mean to be here? What is the story behind this? And so it's key if you're running a business to get really clear on what is the story behind it, what is your intention behind it. And I think that's always resonated with clients from my perspective, that they know I never had this intention of, I'm going to build up this big communication skills training company because that seems to be a way to make a profit. It was always a sense of, here's my journey. I really want to get better at communication. And now that I've been able to find my voice and be able to figure out how to teach that to others, I want to share that. I want other people to be able to find their voice and fulfill their potential as well. And people feel that, and they've even said that, multiple times in relationships we have with clients, where initially they met 3 or 4 companies. The other companies come in saying, here's our products, and we are this corporation that sells this stuff, and you can have it at this price, or if we negotiate, you get it at this price. And there's just no connection. We love connecting with that human being and with that story. And even if you're not the founder, if you're working in a company where you need to sell things, being able to explain what the company stands for through this, not just saying the mission statement, but really explaining the vision behind it, the origin story behind it, is critical for people to buy into that. And it's also part of the reason that we build relationships with people. We say, so tell me about yourself. We want to know, well, who is this person? What is driving their actions, their decisions? And therefore, how might they relate to me? How might they treat me if we get to know each other and we spend time together? So having a true sense of what that story is for yourself before you go into the sort of meetings and interactions can really help other people get to know you, care about you, want to do business with you, want to be in a relationship with you, because they understand the story.
Yeah, 'cause you think about some of the most popular brands to exist, right? Like Apple, for example. Their motto is think different, right? It's like they're literally selling the possibility of a better, different future, right? Or maybe Tesla, for example, like selling the possibility of a more sustainable future through electric vehicles, right? It's like as a business owner, I'm like, kind of looking back at our language and how we talk as far as like what I'm offering and how to really maybe tap more into that. Because do you find that businesses are not very effective at listing like what the possibilities are and more focused on what their features are, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. This ties into it. It's so popular, the speech was Simon Sinek's speech where TEDx, where he talked about start with why.
Yeah, start with why.
Yeah, he said, most companies, and the way he compared Dell and Apple, he said, Dell says, we sell this computer, it has these features, it has these widgets, do you want to buy one? Whereas Apple says, we believe in putting this power into the hands of every person on the planet. We want to connect you with your passions. And we believe that that's important because we care about it. We want that for ourselves and for our friends. And you can be a part of that. Do you want to buy one? Of course I do. Of course I want to buy one. I recently, I feel so excited about it. I finally have a Tesla. And I've bought in right from the beginning. Rightly or wrongly, I've bought into this story from Elon Musk of him. I believe that he had the intention of wanting to make the world better by coming up with electric vehicles, and therefore, not using the fossil fuels, and deciding not to use leather in his vehicles as well. I thought that is a brand that I can believe in, where I'd sit in the vehicle and think, I want to be part of what he is aiming to create in the future. So being able to understand that power of storytelling in business and in relationships is key too. We also like being around people who know who they are and why they are that way. It gives us a sense of integrity about them. The person is more sort of self-assured in who they are, where they came from, and that's very charismatic in itself. And so that's part of why we get drawn in by stories.
Yeah, and this is just, anybody can take this from me as well. Normally when I meet people, I don't ask them what they do. Right. I ask them what they're passionate about. Yeah. And that elicits 2 completely different responses. If you ask somebody what they do, they say, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer. Yeah. I do this, I do that. But if you ask somebody what they're passionate about or what their vision is for their life or what their intentions are, you get so much deeper answers from people where you really understand what drives them, why they do the things they do, not what it is that they do.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
We use that when we're coaching people through. We have these sort of multi-day workshops we take groups through, and initially we say just bring something that is what you normally do at work, that you'd normally have to speak about, present, communicate, and they'll bring it in. And generally speaking, people communicate it in quite a dispassionate, logical, reasonably lifeless way. And we're keen to see that, because we want to know, like, what information are you dealing with day after day? What do you have to do? But we also want to see, where are you stuck currently? And then we say to them, okay, second thing I want you to do, and we teach them storytelling. We say, write a story about something you are deeply passionate about. Like we might say, think about the greatest holiday or travel experience you've ever had, or something that you really care about. If you could change one thing about the way that things work around you today, what would that be? Everyone's got a bugbear, something that they really passionately would love to change. And it's amazing to see how they light up, and their face changes and their body language changes. And you see this part of them that maybe has been buried for months or years suddenly comes out. And we say, and I tend to coach them halfway through with them doing that passionate story. I'll say, I just want you to switch for a moment, go back to slide 37 from earlier on that you were presenting, that you normally do in your meetings, and have this level of passion for that spreadsheet, and get them to put the two things together. And suddenly the words they're choosing are different. The reason that they're explaining something is different. It's coming from a different place, a different energy, a different intention. And the whole room lights up thinking, I didn't know that's what that spreadsheet was about. Wow. You've really brought it to life for me. And it's because they're coming from that place of passion, rather than, well, I have to talk about this spreadsheet.
Yeah, I remember whenever I was in engineering, I dealt with a lot of spreadsheets, right? And people would ask me what I did for work, and my job was fairly complex. I was a mechanical integrity engineer, so I basically made sure that the stationary assets, like our pipelines, our vessels, our tanks, our chemical facilities, were all fit for service. So I would have to do these non-destructive testing techniques where we'd use ultrasonics and magnetic wave frequencies to determine the thickness of these vessels to make sure that it could withstand the pressure of the environment if they were corrosive in any nature. And it was my job to scope that, schedule the inspections, analyze the inspections, determine whether or not we needed to replace the equipment, if so, when, how much the money would be. People would fall asleep in that explanation of what I did. So then I just started simplifying it over time. Say, what do you do? And I would say, well, I make sure shit doesn't blow up. And like, people would immediately be more interested in what I had to say, because now there's an element of risk. And like, I dealt with risk in a very boring way, or if I explained it that way, but immediately that leaves space for the imagination to just go, what does that entail? Like, how do you do that? So it's like, you can also just choose your words differently to get people to be more interested in what you are saying by eliciting some of those like emotional responses, like you talked about earlier, the survival emotional then logical brain. Yes,
there's a nice story about this where, and again, I'm not going to get the details right, so people can look this up online, but this is about somebody going to take a look. I think it was a president at the time going to take a look at what was happening with building the space shuttle back in the 1960s, and there was a janitor there, like, sweeping the floor, and the president went up to them and said, what's it like for you working here? And the janitor said, I'm helping putting a man on the moon. And the president thought, well, that's an amazing thing to be feeling. You're not just sweeping the floor. You are part of this team. You're part of this vision. And I understand that they had this as a shift in the way things were done at Disney as well, where I think that they were in a situation, again, I apologize if I skew the details of this story, but they'd have people cleaning the streets around there, lots of sweet wrappers or things that are being left around. And I believe there was a situation where one of the cleaners was being a bit grumpy with the kids, because these kids come in to the park and they mess it up and they cause this mess and they get frustrated with them. And so some coaching was done around this to say, everybody's job is to put a smile on a child's face. That's it. That's what we do here. And so, I remember going to, I think the last time I went to Disney, I was at a conference in Orlando in 2009. And I remember going in there, and the street sweepers were some of the funniest, most engaging people in the whole park, because they realized, my mission is to make you laugh, to make you smile, to give you a sense of joy. And I happen to be cleaning some stuff around here as well, but I'm here to make sure that you feel joy before you leave. So coming back to the message that I had before of, how do you want people to feel by the end of an interaction? Aiming that you lift each person through your presence should be the goal, and you can apply that to any different job that you have. So tapping into, no matter where you are in an organization, where you happen to work, thinking, what is the core driving story about what this company does and what they stand for. And if that works for you, stay. And if it doesn't, you might need to go somewhere else if you can. But to be in a place where you really believe in the mission and the purpose of that organization then gives you the energy to go to work and go the extra mile and be the best version of yourself, because you know that you are part of this greater story, this greater vision that could be a company that's been around for hundreds of years, or maybe it's just been there for a few hours and it's a startup, but you truly believe in it because you buy into that story and the people around you, and that's going to make you a more effective communicator about it. We do also work with people who are in a place where they're not super inspired by what's happening, or they don't agree with decisions that are happening right now. So we then have to bring them back to being the best version of them in each situation as they navigate tough decisions that they have to make. So, coming back to that centered version of you as a human as you navigate challenging situations is a core skill for people to have too.
Yeah, I love that. I love the thought of just really buying into the vision of an organization. Yeah. And sometimes that's hard when you're not working in an industry that you are fully aligned with, or maybe that is part of you parallel those drivers as well for the industry, because that's how I felt working in oil and gas. Although I was doing what I considered an honorable position by keeping people and the environment safe by doing these inspections. And it was a very important and necessary role to have. I never felt fully aligned with what that company was doing to the planet. And utilizing or using these resources and taking up this land and really polluting our planet in so many different ways, and that's a hard position to be in, because you're conflicted at times, because this pays the bills at that. So how do you show up in that position if you have no other option to really just be the best version of yourself in that situation? I think is a very important lesson as well.
Yeah, and I must say, for my organization, I feel very lucky with the clients we get to work with, brilliant people all over the world who are doing all sorts of different roles. And sometimes I might go in to work with someone from an organization that I don't fully understand all of the things that are going on for them. But what I always aim to do is to think, I'm a human aiming to connect with the other humans in this room and to help them become more of themselves. That's really what I'm here to do. And that these people may stay in this organization, or they may leave. They may, I don't know how long they're going to be here. They could leave next week. They could leave in 10 years. But I'm just aiming to help them connect more with the greatness of their own personality and their abilities as a communicator that will help them be more of themselves day to day. And so as long as I stay focused on that, then that allows me to give a really strong intention to anybody that we may be working with.
It kind of cuts through and really allows you to connect with everybody, that then they can take what service you're offering, or what gifts you're offering them, the way they can take it to anywhere in life, not just in this organization too. I love that. I love that. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. I learned a ton. Anything exciting coming in the future for you that you're working on?
Currently I'm working on my new book, which is called Lift, which will be coming out next year. And it's really to help people apply that intention to all of the different meetings and interactions that they have, and to help them be a more lifted version of themselves day after day, which is something that I've found so important to all of our clients and so important to me as well. So just wanted to make sure that I could share that message with as many people as possible. Well, whenever it does come out, you let me know. I'll be happy to share it on my social platforms and get more people to learn about this concept, because I'm already buying into it just based on this conversation. So I can't wait to read it, and I know it's going to do a lot of good in the world as well. So thank you for that. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. We don't have any kind of corporate sponsorship behind this podcast. We rely on people like you to leave a comment, leave a review, and maybe share it with a friend if you think that they would learn something from this episode. And as always, I greatly appreciate it, and sending you all lots of love and light.